Logic Pro is one of the most popular digital audio workstations around. Today I'm going to show you how to share your Logic projects with a collaborator, whether that's a co-writer, session musician, or a mixing engineer, and whether they're on Logic as well or some other program altogether. Okay, so we want to create the best mix possible that we have, within our capabilities. It doesn't have to be the greatest mix of all time or anything. It's just, a representation of how you kind of hear the mix yourself. You probably have already exported full mixes, but if you have not, or you forgot how to do it, you just go to File, Bounce, and then Project or Section. And for this, we're going to go with the PCM. That's a WAV file. When we export things, we want to just keep everything in the same format that the project is already in. That way we don't have to worry about any, sample rate changes or anything like that. If you're not really sure what your project sample rate is, you can go up here to File, Project Settings, Audio, and then sample rate will be right here. In this case, it's 44.1. So that's what we want to bounce out our project in. And we can see that it's already in 44.1, 16-bit is fine, interleaved is fine, all of this is fine. Start, we want to start from the very beginning, so this is likely going to be all ones. And then the end, I'm just going to look here. 257 looks like a pretty good spot. And somewhere in there, cool. Because we don't need to render all this blank stuff out here. So that looks good. I'm going to hit OK. And then it's going to ask us where to put it. Just put it somewhere that you're going to remember where it's at. Okay, now that that's done, we can begin. Okay, step 1. First off, we're going to make a new project alternative. This will preserve the current state of your project in case you ever need to get back to it. I'm going to assume that everything in the project is ready to send out, meaning you don't have any loose ends to finish up. Everything's edited, you've got all your crossfades finished and everything. It's good to go. So to make a new project alternative, you just go up to File, Project Alternatives, and then you hit New Alternative and you give it a name. I started with Original, and then this one we're just going to call Export. Yes, save. Okay, so now if we go back to Project Alternatives, we will see that we are now on this export version. Our original version, we're not touching that anymore because now we are on export, as we can see here. You could also do a traditional save as, but Logic is going to copy literally every single file, so I don't really recommend doing that in Logic. Okay, step 2. Next, we're going to do a bit of housekeeping. We want to make sure that all of the files associated with this project are rounded up and included in the project folder. Otherwise, your collaborator might not have all of the files that they need. So to do that, all we have to do is go to File, Project Management, Consolidate. Copy audio file. We definitely want the audio files, sampler, audio data, pretty much all this stuff. If you're using any of this stuff, your collaborator is probably going to want it. So just go ahead and grab it. Apple Sound Library content, you probably don't need to check that because if you're sending it to someone who is also on Logic, which I assume you are if you're sending them a Logic file, they should already have all of that on their computer. Click OK, and then if you had audio files that you had pulled in from other parts of your computer that aren't actually in the project folder, that will actually copy them to the project folder, and then that way your collaborator won't get that dreaded, missing file message when they try to open the project. Step 3. We also want to get rid of any unused audio files that are no longer used in the project, but are still sitting around in the project file. So to do that, we want to go up to the library up here, and then go to Edit, select Unused, and then Edit again, and Delete. And that's going to just delete anything that isn't used in this project file. And Logic has a bit of a weird quirk. Just doing that on its own won't completely get rid of everything. We got to go over to Project Management, Cleanup, and we're just going to leave all that selected. Click OK. And this is just going to confirm, do you want to get rid of all these? And I'm going to hit Yep. And then so now we can hit Save. And we've got a much leaner project. Everything that needs to be here is here. Anything that we don't need is not. Okay, step 4. Rename your tracks so that they make sense to a stranger. Use track names that put the type of instrument first, then the specific track in question. For example, inside kick mic becomes kick in. Outside kick mic becomes kick out. Snare top mic becomes snare top. Left overhead mic becomes overhead left. You can kind of see how this works. Left side rhythm guitar DI becomes guitar rhythm left DI. So we've got the type of instrument, then the type of that instrument. So guitar, rhythm, which side it is, left, and then is it a DI or an amp? And then it'll make sense. I'll put this list somewhere on the screen. That'll make a bit more sense. So I'm going to do that here. So a lot of these drums are already ready. Snare, there's no top or bottom. It's just snare in this case. Toms 1, 2, and 3. Ride, hi-hat. We got bass drum. Normally I call that kick. It doesn't matter really. I mean, anybody's going to know what that means. BD is bass drum, but I prefer kick. Bass, that's pretty easy. It's just a bass. Guitar riff L. This looks like a rhythm guitar track to me, so I'm going to rename this guitar rhythm L. Tab down to the next one, guitar ry R. So we've got the type of instrument is a guitar. The subcategory is rhythm guitar. And then to differentiate the two tracks, we've got left and right. You might have 1 and 2 or whatever, but if you have a specific side that you want something on, make sure you indicate that so that you're, if you're sending this to a mixer, they know where to pan everything. Like this overhead 1 and overhead 2, I prefer if you have like left or right, like if you know which side you want things to be on, you can go ahead and let the engineer know that. Like if you know that overhead 1 is supposed to be the left side, just go ahead and indicate that. Okay, and we're going to continue naming things. Solo, what is it? It's a guitar solo, so we're going to indicate guitar. Airy solo, guitar, solo, airy. Clean guitar L. Let's go. Guitar, clean L. Guitar clean R. You can see kind of what we're doing here probably by this point. Guitar acoustic L. Okay, so this is cool. So these are all vocal tracks. I'm down with a V because that just lets me know it's a vocal test. I'm not really sure there, but this is pretty self-explanatory here. The reason for representing the instrument type first in the track name is to make sorting easier. Your collaborator will be able to glance at the beginning of the track name and instantly know where it belongs. This will also help you sort things if they're disorganized, which is the next step. As a bonus, naming your tracks this way will make them automatically sort if you export them as multitracks, which is something you'll be doing if your collaborator uses a DAW other than Logic. Okay, now that we have renamed our tracks, we're going to save the project again. Okay, the next step normally would be to organize all of your tracks so that they're all sorted and like tracks are together. This is already sorted, so we've got vocals together, guitars are together, the bass track is, on its lonesome, and then we've got the drum tracks together. Okay, so this is an important step. If your collaborator does not have the exact same plugins as you, they're not going to get everything the same way that you hear it. So you're going to have to print anything that you want the sound of, like say the guitar tracks, for example, say you want this tone on the track. So if we want that tone on the track, we need to make sure we print that. Okay, so we're going to want to select the track that we want to bounce in place. That's what Logic calls it, is a bounce in place. We're going to go up to this edit menu and then go to bounce and join, select bounce regions in place. And then for the name, we're going to replace this BIP with wet. Because that'll make sense to anybody who does this, whether they're on Logic or something else. The BIP might be a little bit weird for people who aren't on Logic. Destination, we're going to want to put it on a new track. Source, we want to leave that alone because we still want that other track. Make sure bypass effects plugins is not selected because that'll just defeat the whole purpose of what we're doing here. Include audio tail in file and include audio tail in region. We want those selected because if we have like a delay or something as an effect on that track, we don't want that to get cut off. Include volume / pan automation. If you don't actually have any of that stuff going on, just leave that unselected because otherwise it's like like if in this instance, how the track is panned to the left, that's going to just make a stereo file with only one side having audio, and that'll be annoying. So we're going to leave that off for this particular case. And on normalize, overload protection only is totally fine. Click OK. Okay, and we now have this printed version of this track. You can see it has no plugins on it, but it's got the amp tone. So now that we have this plain old DI, we can actually name it DI. So now we have both versions of this track. We've got the DI version and the wet version. Okay, so that takes care of that track. We're going to want to do the same thing for anything that has a plugin that we want to, keep the sound of that plugin. So that'll usually be your guitar tones, bass tones, things like that. Bass, we're usually going to want a DI. So I'm going to label the original bass track DI. And then we have this other track. And added this critical thing here. We don't want that. We now have printed versions of all of our guitar and bass tones. If your drums are MIDI and you intend them to stay as MIDI, the MIDI files are going to be transferred along with the Logic file. So you don't really have to worry about that yet. You can print those MIDI drums on a stereo file or, Multitracks even if you want. But if you're not super, thrilled with those will mostly just be used as a reference, and then they'll be doing, resampling or whatever to get your final tones in the mix. Okay, so we have all of our guitar and bass tones printed, and we have all of these other ones are just DIs. We don't have any tones for those on this particular one. Acoustic instruments, like these acoustic guitars, or drums, like this particular song has acoustic drums, and vocals, that's an acoustic instrument. All of those, we want to just keep everything as raw as possible, so that means if you've got any plugins on them, just turn them off. And then the DI tracks, we can just turn off any effects that we had on those. I mean, you don't really have to remove them or anything, because if your collaborator doesn't have them, they're just going to not show up. If they do have them, then they might not need these wet tracks, but it's a good idea to print these anyway, just so, just to cover your bases. So now we're ready to create the actual files that we're going to send to your collaborator. If your collaborator is using a different DAW other than Logic, use the video chapters to skip ahead to step 10. If they are on Logic, then just continue here. Step 7. If your collaborator is also using Logic Pro, you can simply create a backup of the project and send that to them. So in order to do that, we are going to go to File, and then Save a Copy As. And then we just put that wherever we want. In this case, I'm going to go to File Sharing Demo, and then you give it a name. I mean, it's probably already going to have the name that'll work. And then name it appropriately, and then you hit Save. Step 8. Once we have created that copy, we're going to want to open up that copy, and we're going to want to just double check to make sure that we've cleaned that up. So we're going to go to Project Management, Cleanup, all these same things, click OK, boom. Because sometimes you just, when you're doing all this consolidating and stuff, sometimes you'll create some extra files that you don't really need. And that'll make sure you're not sending any unnecessary stuff to your collaborator. Okay, save the project again. Okay, step 9, locate this latest project file, compress/zip it, and upload it to a file sharing service like Dropbox, Google Drive, iCloud, or you send it, and give your collaborator the resulting link. So we have it right here, right click it, go down to compress, and it's gonna create this zip file for us. Don't worry about data compression with zipped or compressed files. You're not going to lose any sound quality. This has been standard practice for sharing audio projects for decades at this point. Okay, we now have this compressed zip folder thing. This is what we need to put on Dropbox. In my case, it's already on Dropbox, so all I would have to do is copy Dropbox link, and then I paste that into a text message or an email or whatever, and then my collaborator has access to it. And then that's done. Okay, so if your collaborator is not using Logic Pro, you've got a few extra steps. Okay, step 10. You're going to need to print individual files for each track. These individual track files are called multitracks, or multis for short. Some people mistakenly call them stems. Stems are actually submixes, but I digress. Before we print these tracks, we're going to want to reset the faders and bypass effects for any tracks that are meant to be dry or without effects. This would be things like a guitar DI, for example, or a vocal track where we want to send the raw vocal. You may want to make a new project alternative for this if you don't want to lose your current fader balance. To do that, we go to File, Project Alternatives, New Alternative, and we're going to call this Export Multis. The reason we're resetting the faders and bypassing effects here is because we don't want any unintentional alterations to the raw signal. We've already printed the wet versions of these, so for the dry versions, we want things as raw and unaltered as possible. Okay, so for raw tracks like acoustic things and stuff that we just want everything to be 100% raw, we can select all of them, like say all these drums, for example, and then just alt-click the fader. That'll put them all back to 0, and then do the same with the pan controls. That'll 0 those out. Kick double, I did not get that one. There we go. Bass DI, 0 that out. 0 vocals. 0. Okay, we've got everything zeroed out. Hit save. Cool. Okay, to print these multi-tracks, we're going to use the other export function that exports multiple tracks simultaneously. We're going to print these tracks at the same bit depth and sample rate that the project is already in. So if we showed you this earlier, but just in case you forgot, if you want to find the sample rate, go to File, Project Settings, Audio, and we can see that our sample rate is 44.1 kilohertz. So we're going to want to export all of these multi-tracks in that same sample rate. So we go to File, Export, All Tracks as Audio Files. And we're going to need to choose where we want to put these. In this case, I'm going to put them in that Dropbox folder. Okay, I'm going to make a new folder called Multis. And this is where I'm going to put it. I'm going to leave this trim silence at file end. That'll pretty much just take care of the file length for me. Save format, we're going to stick with WAV. Okay, 24-bit is fine. I don't have any multi-output software instruments in this thing. You could choose whatever you want. I'm going to go ahead and bypass effects plugins because we already printed all of the effects plugins that we want to include. We're going to go ahead and include tail, which probably isn't going to make a difference if we're bypassing the plugins, but I'm going to leave that on. I'm going to leave volume and pan automation switched off. Include tempo information. Yeah, I'm going to leave that on. Normalize, overload protection only. Normally, I don't leave that on, but if you're sending this to a mixer, it's probably okay to leave that on. They're not going to want any clipped audio files. Okay, and then this is where it kind of lets you get fancy with the naming scheme. So we've got our track name. That should be it. That's all we need. This is what our file names are going to look like. Basically, just the name that we gave it. So there we go. We hit export. Okay, so now we should have all of our multi-tracks, both dry and wet, waiting for us in this folder here. Step 11, tempo information. Your collaborator is also going to need tempo information. If your song has only one set tempo, you can include the BPM number in a text file or file name and include this in the files that you send. However, if you have tempo changes, it's easiest to just include a MIDI file with the multi-tracks. If your project doesn't already contain MIDI data from the beginning to the end, we can simply add a MIDI track that has a note at the very beginning of the song and a note at the very end. If you've got MIDI drums already and like synths and everything, you probably don't have to worry about this. You can just export all of the MIDI. But if your project is like this one that has no MIDI whatsoever, it's easy. You just add a MIDI track. So we're going to right click here, or I guess you can also click this. I'm going to do external MIDI because it just needs to be a MIDI track of some sort. And we're going to draw a blank region. If you don't have all these tools up here, and like this, I've got this pencil tool set to the command key. If you don't have all this extra stuff, you can just change your pointer tool to the pencil tool, click a little region there, and then go back to the pointer tool. Going to the beginning there, I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to extend this all the way to the end of the song. Cool. And then at the end, I'm going to put a little MIDI note. Blurp. And then I'm also going to put a MIDI note at the beginning. So we now have bookended this here entire song with MIDI data. And this MIDI data is going to contain any tempo changes that happen to be in this project file. This particular one has none, but we'll just, pretend like there is. So now that we have MIDI data in this project, all we need to do is select our timeline. We just want to select everything, make sure we have all of this MIDI region thing in here. Then we're going to go up to File, Export Selection as MIDI file. And then we're going to want to go to that same multis folder that we put all the audio tracks in. Multis, okay, export demo 1. I'm just going to put MIDI right there, really big at the end. Save, boom. Okay, so we now have all of this here. We've got our MIDI data and everything. This MIDI file will contain all of the tempo information in the project. So now we have all of our audio files and this tempo map, basically, and that is contained in this MIDI file. So we'll want to specify the sample rate and bit depth of our exported audio files and include that with our files as a courtesy. So one example of, you could put all this information in a text file like this, and you can also put it in the name of a folder. Like say if you're putting these all together, new folder with selection, you could put, song name dash 44.1 kilohertz dash 24B for bit dash 138 BPM. And that's just like a courtesy thing, because in that way, as soon as they see that folder, they know what they're dealing with. Okay, step 13, we're going to zip this up and compress the folder containing all of our goodies, upload it to a file sharing service like Dropbox, Google Drive, iCloud, or YouSendIt, and send the resulting link to our collaborator. So we're going to right click, compress. It's going to do this, it's going to take a minute. And again, you don't have to worry about file compression in this context. It's not going to degrade audio quality whatsoever. Okay, so now we have this zip file, and this is what we want to put on Dropbox or Google Drive or YouSendIt or whatever. In this case, it's already on Dropbox for me, so all I have to do is copy Dropbox link, and then I just paste that into an email to my collaborator or whatever, and they've got access to it. All done. I hope this was helpful. If this was helpful for you, please tell a friend. Like and subscribe if you want to. Find me on Patreon. Buy me a beer. Say howdy. All right. See you on the next one.